honor and pleasure to introduce you to Danielle Conway, as Putty said, the Dean of the Penn State Dickinson School of Law. As a member of the Post Schell Board of Directors and a member of the Alumni Council of Dickinson Law, I want to congratulate Danielle on being selected by the PNS Women's Group as their 2022 honoree in conjunction with our celebration of Women's History Month. Danielle has had a distinguished career and is an inspiration to the Dickinson law community, as well as many other lawyers in the country. She has so many accomplishments, quite frankly, I doubt that she could list them without notes. So I'm going to have to refer to my notes to explain them all. But Danielle is a leading expert in procurement law, entrepreneurship, and intellectual property law. She joined Dickinson Law after serving for 4 years as Dean of the University of Maine School of Law. And I would make a comment about that. When we were interviewing potential deans, we were told by the recruiters that there was no way we could get another dean from another law school. But nonetheless, we were able to attract Danielle to Dickinson Law to run our programs. Before her 4 years at the University of Maine Law School, she spent 14 years on the faculty of the University of Hawaii William S. Richardson School of Law, where she was the inaugural Distinguished Professor of Business Law. Prior to her deanships, Dean Conway was a member of faculties at Georgetown University Law Center and the University of Memphis School of Law. She also served as a Fulbright Scholar in Australia and later as Chair in Law at the La Trobe University Faculty of Law and Management. Danielle's scholarly agenda and speeches have focused on advocating for public education and for the rights of marginalized groups, including Indigenous peoples, minoritized people, and members of rural communities. She is the co-recipient of the inaugural Association of American Law Schools Impact Award, which honors individuals who have had a significant positive impact on legal education and the legal profession. Dean Conway was recognized for her work in establishing the Law Dean's Antitrust Clearinghouse Project, which provides information to both law deans and the public about issues with regard to racism. And while that may seem to be a long list of accomplishments, somehow Danielle, in the midst of all this work, Danielle served 27 years in the U.S. Army, including active duty, reserve duty, and National Guard duty, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. That's a very brief explanation of Danielle's background. I just don't want to spend a lot of time on that because we want to spend our time listening to Danielle and what's happening at the Penn State Dickinson School of Law. But I will give this introduction along those lines. Danielle came to Dickinson Law in the summer of 2019, just in time for the pandemic. And I'm sure she didn't plan that, but she came with an aggressive plan to improve both the diversity and academic standing of both our students and our faculty. At the same time, she must both manage and expand the relationship between Dickinson Law and the Penn State University, including the many schools at the Penn State University. One in particular of interest is the Penn State Medical School in Hershey. In this regard, it is worth noting that in the couple of years just before Danielle joined us, that Penn State separated its law school at Penn State or State College, and that Carlisle, the Dickinson School of Law, into two separately accredited law schools. The only other precedent for that I know of are the California schools and the University of California system. Even though both schools are under the governance of Penn State, they are separately accredited and separately ranked by the U.S. News and World Report. Frankly, I thought that agenda, and still think to some degree today, was a daunting agenda for one person to handle all those things. But I think later today, Dean Conway will show you she's been up to it. In regards to Penn State, I wanted to advise you that Dean Conway has been selected as one of three co-chairs of the Select Penn State Presidential Commission on Racism, Bias, and Community Safety, which is just one of many examples how she's connecting this separately accredited law school to the Penn State system. There also have been detailed discussions with the Hershey Medical Center and Hershey Medical School about how to integrate these two university schools in a productive way, which I find particularly interesting given the emphasis of our firm in healthcare law. In closing, I want to thank our women's group for the selection of Danielle as our honoree in 2022 and reiterate my congratulations to Dean Conway as our honoree. With that, Dean, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike Gang, to Putty Tolan, and to Jim Johnston. It is just a profoundly honorable experience that I am going to have with you tonight. I could not be more pleased to be here. How many times in one's life does somebody ask them to show up and talk about themselves? So thank you for that opportunity. I can do that. But before I talk about myself, I do want to take a nod from Mike Gang and talk about your law school. Now, when I say your law school, it doesn't matter whether you graduated from Penn State Dickinson Law or another law school. We only have 200 law schools in the United States, and we are the gatekeepers of the rule of law. So when you think about all of these institutions, they are our law schools. They are our first line of defense for the rule of law, for democracy, and for our second founding constitution. So I just want to thank everyone for accepting me today as your law school dean to give this talk. I am pleased to talk about both Dickinson law history in a bit, but more broadly, women's history, particularly as it relates to the profession. And when you combine these two subjects, you will see why Dickinson law has an important place in history. So yes, we are one of two separately accredited law schools at Penn State University. But Dickinson law, established in 1834, that is the antebellum period, 1834, the gateway to the West. Dickinson law is the fifth oldest law school in the nation and the first law school in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that history is critical. And think about opening up the doors of the law school to people venturing forth into new territories. Think about what it means to open the doors of the law schools to women. Arabella Mansfield being the first woman to be barred in the United States of America. She came through here. She had to come through here on her way to Iowa. And then Charlotte E. Ray, the first African-American woman to be barred in the nation in Washington, D.C. I am a graduate of Howard University School of Law, and so is Charlotte E. Ray. She received her bar in 1872. And then bringing Dickinson Law back into focus, Julia Radel, being Dickinson Law's first woman student, graduate of the law school in 1897, and editor-in-chief of what we know as the Law Review. And then I would be remiss in talking about Dickinson Law, women's history, if I did not mention Judge Sylvia H. Rambo. We just had the Rambo Awards at Dickinson Law last week. And I'm going to take this moment to remind you that Judge Rambo graduated from Dickinson Law in 1962. Again, the temporality should be so important and should not be lost on you. 1962, before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before the Fair Housing Act, we had Sylvia Rambo graduating from Dickinson Law. And she became a judge in 1976 here in Cumberland County. Judge Rambo was then appointed to the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and she served in that role from that time, 1979, to about 1999, when she was the Chief Judge. So this is important history on this Women's History Month. And Sylvia Rambo did all of that before Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed to the bench in 1981. So this is the history that we are delving into today that should begin to make us feel this awesome sense of accomplishment as women in the legal profession. We add so much to the profession by virtue of these intersectional identities and experiences. And that's what you've asked me to come speak with you about today, my personal experiences in the law. And I can tell you, I did not, at the time I was thinking about being a lawyer, I didn't know what a lawyer was. I thought I knew. I made it up in my 8-year-old head what a lawyer was. I thought Martin Luther King Jr. was a lawyer because he just spoke so well. That's how I define being a lawyer. And that's what inspired me to be a lawyer. I didn't have a parent at the time who was in law school. I didn't have a relative at the time. I just knew from listening to these speeches that my mom kept on recording that this was the profession for me. And I made every step count to get to college to do that. When I got to college, though, I have to tell you that I had really striking and not so positive experiences because I was one of only a few African-American women at my university. That was enough to bear, but I also had other external societal things to deal with. And many of you may not know this, but I've been very public about it. I've given TEDx talks about it, speeches about it, but I was falsely arrested when I was in college. Why? Because I was outside of a dormitory where I worked as a resident assistant, and police didn't think I belonged there. And so they approached me, they arrested me, and they did not realize that I was a student at my university. That was the first time I questioned whether this was actually the field for me. How could I go into the legal profession knowing things like this happen? This was and could have been a defining tragedy. But really what I want to convey is that you never walk a path alone. And at that time, I had the great support of the legal clinic at New York University School of Law, and they dealt with that issue and put it to bed for me quick enough so that I could go to law school. That's when I understood the power of law, the power of law to protect our rights, our dreams. And I went to law school with a renewed purpose. That renewed purpose was to ensure that I could do the very same thing that Michael Zeidman at that clinic did for me when I was at the wrong end of the law. I had a brilliant time in law school. I was motivated by that negative experience, but also the positive experiences. Walking through halls, listening to students talk about the law, arguing about it, fighting about it. It was such an impressive opportunity for me to see people who look like me trying out the law before entering the profession. I was fortunate. I didn't have to look for a job. I had the military because I was an ROTC cadet in undergrad. And because I had the military, I knew that's where I was going to practice law. That was a positive influence in my life. When I was assessed into the military, I passed the bar on the first time and was able to go to the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and school. I was a JAG officer, and it has been one of the most important jobs I've ever had in my life. That's where I learned duty. That's where I learned loyalty. That's where I learned obligation. And an important word to the law, nobility. So to connect all of those things that I experienced in the Army to all of these characteristics of this profession, that was a significant and important time in my life to define the kind of lawyer that I knew I had to be. I spent 27 years representing my country, and it is my country. I share it with all of you, but it is my country. I learned from the best lawyers that one could ever sit at the seat of justice to learn from. And I want to talk about one lawyer in particular, because I hope at the end of this talk, you realize that none of us gets to where we are without another person, without other people supporting us, creating platforms for us, shepherding us. And so anything that I've accomplished is owed in part to this person I'm going to talk with you about. And no, Terry Thomason is not a woman, but in the good words of Frederick Douglass, he's a woman's rights man. And there is every wonderful thing about a man who can call himself a woman's rights man. Terry Thomason was my champion in the Army and in the legal profession. He was my commanding officer, and he knew something I didn't know when I was just coming up. He knew I was smart. He knew I was dedicated. He knew I was disciplined before I knew it. And it's amazing when somebody can be that person for you and to champion you until you can figure it out for yourself. I got every opportunity I could ever ask for because someone like Terry Thomason stood up and said, I'm opening every door for you. He saw that I just wanted to be in this profession, to do the best that I could. That's what he saw, and he cultivated it. I've had many people who have supported me throughout my career. My mother, who has been absolutely my cheerleader. I have had wonderful colleagues in the legal academy and in the military, but none has done for me what my mentor, my champion, Terry Thomason, has done for me, to open up not only these doors, but open up my mind to accept that I am good enough. So when I had to leave Hawaii and had to leave my champion, Terry Thomason, who I'd spent 15 years with, because I was also of counsel at a law firm, while I was also on the faculty of the University of Hawaii, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go because Terry had been suffering some medical issues, and I wanted to stay close by. And Terry coached me and said, you would be doing me a disservice if you did not go out and take your special brand of leadership to the places where it needs to be. And I can tell you that I cried whale tears when I sat down with him and realized that he was right. And thank goodness he did that for me, because otherwise I wouldn't have these opportunities to do the work that we are doing right now at Dickinson Law, the work that I was able to do at the University of Maine School of Law. And I will tell you about that now, but I just need you to know who was the reason for me pushing farther to lead in the legal academy. So my special brand of leadership, the thing that keeps me going, the thing that makes me go to any challenge and know before I get there that I can hurdle it, is the positionality that I have. You may not know this, but I'm a Black woman. I just put that out there, just in case there was doubt. And that's important because I have a lived experience, and that lived experience allows me to add to your lived experiences in those of people around me. Then situational concerns and factors animate my leadership. Because of those lived experiences, knowing how to translate with people, knowing how to sit in someone else's shoes, and knowing that every challenge has a unique and different set of possibilities as solutions. This leadership that guides me is dimensional, and that means it has depth. That means it has substance, but it's only as good as it is authentic. It belongs to my lived experience. And then there are these external factors, knowing that people have different ways of being, knowing that people have different experiences themselves, and acknowledging that. When Putty asked me to talk about what is it that allows you to approach a new opportunity and not to shrink from it, it's understanding each one of those factors. It's understanding what Terry Thomason saw in me, that there was worth and value in me as not just a person, but me as a lawyer, someone who provides service to those who do not have the voice to do the work for themselves. So it's bringing all this together to say, I will stand in the breach of adversity. I've had 27 years to practice it in the Army. I will stand there for you. I will take my failures in lumps just like I will take my successes and my privileges. And I will do it not because there is something at the end of that rainbow for me, but I do it because I authentically believe in the relationship and the personal interconnectedness that we have as human beings. And I believe many of us have this, and we need to channel it, and we need to talk about it and speak it into existence. Those are the things that help me meet every single challenge. I'll transition now and just end with a little bit about the challenges at Dickinson Law and our entire legal academy and legal profession, what we have been dealing with, at least since 2020. We've been dealing with a pandemic that has taken loved ones from us. We've been dealing with a pandemic that has unveiled the continuation and the perpetuation of systemic racism. We've been dealing with really horrific political chasms. All three of these things call on us as lawyers to be the servants, the service providers that we've been trained to be. When the murder of George Floyd occurred, I was, like many of you, paralyzed. I was paralyzed because right in that other room is my 10-year-old Black son. And when I saw George Floyd on the ground, there was nothing I could do to shake that feeling that that could be my baby on the ground. That's probably been my greatest challenge in life. Putty asked me to talk about what's my greatest challenge. It's breaking through the near paralysis to do what I was called to do as a lawyer, to do what I was called to do as a teacher, to do what I was called to do as a public servant, and not to break, even though I was afraid. Not to break, even though all I wanted to do was huddle in a corner with my child. And we did it. When I say we, I mean my Dickinson Law faculty and staff colleagues joined together with me and said, this is how this law school is going to respond. We responded with 2 unanimous resolutions to teach according to a platform of anti-racism. We decided to make sure that our students understood the ins and outs of the 14th Amendment. We promised and pledged that we would lead the legal academy to double down on equal protection of the laws. We have been at Dickinson Law leading 200 law schools using a systems design approach to address, acknowledge, and act to create a structure for systemic, racial, and intersectional equity to take hold. Note what I have not said, but note what I have said. And I, as a Black woman, have not done this by myself. I have done this with 76 people at Dickinson Law who believe in fairness, equality, liberty, the 14th Amendment, and the Bill of Rights. That is why we are leading, because we understand that to be part of our value system and our mission. I'm going to close out by saying my mother is a fabulous woman. She went back to law school when I started law school. No, that's wrong. She went back to law school when I was an undergrad. That's better. That's right. But she became a lawyer because she knew I wanted to be a lawyer. So in her way, she created this path so that I could see how to do this. That was a sacrifice, going to law school at night as a middle-aged woman, as a single parent. She is absolutely amazing. And I include her as one of the shining lights in my life to show me the power of a woman. I include her because she sits right there with Terry Thomason, who I spoke to you about, as a woman's rights man. And I include the two of them alongside my colleagues at Dickinson Law, who created a platform for me to lead. None of us does this by themselves, none of us. And I would dedicate this talk to all of those people and thank them for seeing my worth and seeing me every day. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dean. We're looking at questions now. Please pause just a moment.
Okay, should I read them?
Please go ahead.
So the first question from Lindsay Bergstresser. Hope I got that right. Looking back, if you could give any advice to yourself as a young woman attorney entering the practice of the law, what would it be? I have a very good answer for this. Never be something you are not. Never try to be someone you are not. I'll give you an example because that can seem really abstract. When I first started teaching as a freshly minted law professor teaching legal research and writing, what's the first thing I did? Remember I talked to you about Terry Thomason? I tried to be the image of a white male professor. You gotta laugh at that. That's got to make you laugh. And it was so inauthentic. It didn't work. It was terrible. I was terrible. But the minute I started channeling myself, this voice, my North Philadelphia twang, that's when the authenticity came out. So instead of trying to emulate someone down to the T, be yourself. And if you, as a young lawyer, do not know something, the best thing you can do is ask somebody for help. And here's what I can tell young lawyers. You know how to research better than any of these senior lawyers. You know how to find the material better than they do. So you can run circles around them in that regard. But don't throw them out because they've got such wisdom. They're institutional citizens in your firm. So they kind of know the dance, how something's supposed to go. So take your power skills, your superpowers of research, and their institutional power and do a dance. And that's how you become authentically your own lawyer. I hope that answers that question. So the second question I have from Jessica Rogers, from your perspective, what are the best ways that practicing attorneys can create a more inclusive legal profession and help law students entering the profession? Okay, everybody hold on to your seats. Are you ready? Every gatekeeping role we have in the legal profession, this is the hold on to your seat part. Embedded in those gatekeeping functions is systemic inequality. And if you can, at the outset, acknowledge that and say, let's take the time to do a holistic review, that gives you an excellent chance to be inclusive. So what am I talking about? If somebody came to me and asked me for my LSAT score, I would just have a real problem with that. If somebody came to me and said, I mean, I'm talking about at this juncture in my life, what was your GPA? I would have a real problem with that. You want to look at the work the person has done. You want to look at the contribution the person has made. And you want to look at where that person has come from and where have they traveled to. If you can glean from that, this person has grit, perseverance, diligence, strength, courage, and resilience. That's the person you give a shot to. That's how you create an inclusive environment. Okay. You talk, oh, wait. Is this another question, Lindsay? I think so. Lindsay asked another question. Yeah, okay. You talked about mentors and how important they have been to your success. What opportunities are there for Dickinson Law alumni and other lawyers to develop mentor relationship with Dickinson Law students? Oh, yes. Is that the softball question? So give me your contact information. I'm going to put you on a committee. I'm going to put you on a trusted advisor group committee. I'm going to ask you to come present at our context and competencies class. I'm going to ask you to come do mock interviews with our students. I'm going to ask you to talk with Jim and to Mike and say, would you look at this person to hire this person? I've got things for you to do. So send me your email. Mine is dzc5647@psu.edu. Send me an email. That's a great question. All right. Those were the questions.
Dana, it's Mike. I have a question. Some years ago, I read an article that said, and this is dated, that if you wanted a woman in your practice to succeed, you had to take the initiative to get that person opportunity, get them in front of clients, support them. Tried to do that with our young women. And do you think that's still valid? Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. And it was one of the reasons why I talked about my champion, Terry Thomason, who recognized quickly that I was a unicorn, a Black woman in Hawaii. And he knew that. He inherently knew that, which is why he opened up so many opportunities for me. And so it makes a difference. And let me add to that. When a young woman, a woman of color, or a person of color comes to you and they say, I'm reading a situation this way. Can you help me? Just say yes. just say yes, right? Oftentimes and look, I do this too, because you can tell from the way I talk, I am a huge institutional organizational supporter. I love the institutions that I am involved with. But just because you love the institutions doesn't mean that there aren't things that can be improved in that institution, and doesn't mean that someone isn't experiencing something differently in the institution. So it is so important to just acknowledge what that person may be experiencing, and then do the strategic problem solving to try to ameliorate the situation.
Yeah, one of the things that stresses me a little, and I think stresses us in the context of, a remote working environment, is that our young lawyers, not just women, even when they come to the office, they sit in their office and just look at the computer. And, it used to be I could go down the hall of my lawyers and say, come on, let's go to lunch. And everybody seems to be too busy, or maybe they don't like me, but whatever the answer is. But it's hard to, it's a little harder to engage lawyers these days and have that kind of interaction. But takes more effort, I think, but it's worth it.
Can I tell you that the Zoom feature is actually quite impressive when it comes to that? And I would say, and I have benefited from this as a leader. I have my one-on-one meetings with my direct reports, but when I want to do Zoom socializing, I make sure I'm on the call with 3 to 4 people. And just talk with people about how is it going? What are some of the challenges that you're experiencing? And let's just have a quick conversation. And it doesn't have to be an hour. It literally can be 20 minutes. At Penn State Dickinson Law, we use Teams. And I have solved some really thorny problems because people can immediately connect with me on Teams. And when I say thorny problems, I don't mean organizational problems. I mean the kind, and I see this is recorded, so I'll try to be a little obtuse. But I mean the kind of problems like, do you know what so-and-so said to me? Those kind of problems. But it's important to give people space for that, because underneath that, Mike, is something that is real and palpable. And that is that people are anxious, they are stressed, they are, even though they're on Zoom and they're looking at the computer and doing their work, they have pent up anxiety. And so you have to give people an opportunity to expel that. And one of the best ways is if they have quick, easy access to you, if they know they can come to you, if they know that you're not going to spill all their beans on a recorded Zoom call like I just did, they're going to trust you.
No names.
No names.
No names.
There's some more questions here.
Yeah, good.
Robin Nagel? Nagel. Thank you. Sorry. During your tenure as a JAG attorney, how did you deal with sexist or racist or paternalistic attitudes by opposing counsel? This is a good question. In the military, when I was a JAG attorney, I actually had unbelievable respect from my opposing counsel. It was actually, I had a civilian chain of command that I experienced some of these things with. And that was really interesting for me as I look back on it now. I rarely had these challenges with the military chain of command, but when I was dealing with civilians, I seemed to have these challenges. And so the one way I've dealt with that, which was very effective, is your subordinate employees and your non-commissioned officers. You make sure that you have them in your collective or your alliance, because they will be able to run interference for you. They will be able to ask certain questions that you cannot ask, and they will be able to attempt solutions and problem solving, because they have their actual levers on certain pain points and pressure points. And they have gotten me out of some really uncomfortable situations with higher civilian chain of command. And I'll give you an example, because I know that was a little abstract. I had at one point in my rating system civilians who rated me really badly. And they rated me really badly, again, because I was the only Black woman and everybody else got rated higher than I got rated, even though, amazingly enough, I was the only one who had earned her LLM and government contracts. I was closing cases like nobody's business. So I'm like, why did I get a 2 rating and other people got 1s? And the NCOs left all this stuff out on the table because they had the question first. And they said, what is this? We understand you've been doing a great job. They said, we're going to lunch, but there's some stuff on that table you need to look at. And they let me look at it and talk about getting inside information. And I took that information armed with facts, and I was able to confront my civilian chain of command and say, this is not correct. This is not right. And I told them, until you get it right, I'm going to be at home. Call me when you fix it. And they called me the next day, and guess what? They fixed it. So, part of that is having people who have your back, but the other part of it is being courageous and calling it out. So, Julie Peeler, do you have any advice for how attorneys can promote inclusivity and diversity in private practice? So I talked a little bit about the hiring and a little bit about retention. Let's talk a little bit about processes and procedures. How about that? So what could an organization, a private law firm, do with respect to their policies and procedures to embed more equity into those procedures? How about looking at leave to take care of family and equally applying that leave across the organization? How about developmental training and opportunities, again, across the board? How about making sure pay structures are equitable? These are absolute foundational principles for advancing and promoting inclusivity and diversity. So we have to, I've said this word maybe probably 8 times since we've been talking. Acknowledgement. And don't think that I haven't had to deal with this as a leader of a law school. I most certainly had to deal with this from the moment I walked in. I got the books. I saw pay inequity. I had to do something about it. And instead of doing it on a piecemeal basis, I said, we have got to look at this systemically across the board. And we're still doing that work. And it takes a long time. And I've asked people for their patience. I've asked people for their belief in me that I would get it done, because you just can't come in someplace you don't know the structure and just say, okay, everybody, we're going to do it right now. No, you have to get in, you got to build relationships, you got to learn the accounting system, you got to do the math and figure out the inequities, you got to see how long people have been here. It's a lot of work to do. And I asked people to give me 3 years. And within this 2.5 years, I've just about got the corrections done. That was a good question.
Hi, Dean. There's actually another question from Jessica Rogers.
Okay, let me try to find it.
Look under answered.
Okay. Okay, another one from Jessica. Okay, I see it. She says, and never ever do this either, Jessica. See, this is one of my don't do's all the time. I don't want to hog all the airtime on questions. No, hog all the airtime. Take your place. But I'm just enjoying this discussion so much and really value your insights and opinions. You clearly touched on the ongoing confirmation hearings and on gatekeeping. How does this historic confirmation make you feel? So thank you for asking that question because, wow, again, you see me and you recognize me. That is huge what you just did. I want to use what you just asked me to say. That's exactly how you perform inclusivity and diversity. So thank you for that, number one. Number two, I teach a class called Women's Suffrage, the 19th Amendment, and the Duality of a Movement here at the law school. I love the class. It's fabulous. I have a paper coming out about it in the Alabama Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law Review later in the year. I am fortified that we as a nation have created a pathway for a Black woman to be nominated to the Supreme Court of the United States. I chose those words intentionally. We. Now, I am absolutely disgusted and appalled by how lawyers in that room are mangling law throughout this process. I mean, mangling it. It's one thing to say, and I do believe this, it is one thing to argue, should we elevate people to the court because of their race? We can have that conversation all day. I'm loving that conversation. But to mangle the 14th Amendment, to mangle the sentencing guidelines, it further entrenches us as a nation into a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation and misinformation about legal history. And to, for example, call history critical race theory, that is obnoxious. You know, if you read Justice Harlan's dissent, he told you who he was, and he still dissented in Plessy versus Ferguson, but he told you who he was. And he said it was wrong. So that's not critical race theory. That's called history. And so I'm appalled that our history and our future promise of a multicultural democracy is in jeopardy because people don't want to study history. I'm appalled by that. Hey, you know, personally, me, 27 years in the military, I've seen some things. There aren't a lot of things that people can do to make me cry. And this wouldn't be one of them. But that's why I'm not sitting in that seat right now. Because I would have something to say about this behavior because I have given my life service to this nation. And I do not appreciate how these senators are making my country look. That's how I feel about it. That was a mouthful.
I'm showing no further questions at this time.
I bet you there are no questions after that one.
Dean Conway, I just want to thank you for your taking the time to be with us this evening. It means a great deal. We are so proud to have you as our honoree. The gratitude that you expressed toward your mentor, Mr. Thomason, was really moving and really meaningful, and I think a real lesson. And I want to thank you for all the wisdom that you shared in this brief time. You have really delivered tonight by inspiring us, and I want to thank you for that. We are extremely grateful and honored that you have joined us. And on behalf of our firm, and as a small token of our appreciation, I just want to say how pleased we are to be making a financial donation to the Penn State Dickinson Law Future Fund in order to assist the law school with critically important needs. So thank you again for being with us this evening, Dean Conway. And I am very proud to say that my alma mater is in very good hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means the world to me, Jim.